Okay.
And then we're not mentioning that.
No. Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to today's meeting of City York Council's Audit and Governance Committee. My name is Cass Hollier. I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. We've got various members of the committee and officers sat around the table. So just ask if people could introduce themselves first time they speak, just for the record, that'd be appreciated. I could ask then, so apologies, we've got apologies from Mr. Binney, the independent member, who's unfortunately not able to join us today. Councillor Burton, I think we're expecting, but is just held up for the moment. Otherwise, we're all here. So ask if there's any declarations of interest. No. Can move on then to the minutes and action log. And if we start with the first set of minutes from 9th of July. Is there any comments or issues with those? If not, happy to sign those. Okay. Move on then to the set of minutes from the 31st of July. Any questions, issues?
No.
All right.
Thanks. Yeah, there's a minutes item that said completion reports talking about projects or major projects. Completion reports will be monitored to ensure minor outstanding issues were completed within the timelines. But I think it's not quite right, because I think the issue was that the project completion reports were happening after all the snagging rather than happening before the final snagging. So I've suggested wording to correct that to say project completion reports would be completed sooner after the substantive completion of the project, and any minor outstanding actions will be monitored to ensure proper timely execution, or words to that effect. Happy for those to be finessed offline, but I think the main point wasn't that there were outstanding issues that weren't being fixed. It was the fact that we were waiting till everything was done that didn't need to wait until it was done before we did the project completion and lessons learned. And that meant that lessons learned were being recorded several years down the line of where they could have been. I think that's a correct retelling of events, but.
Okay. Seeing we're happy with that change. Yeah. Okay, sign those as and when. Move then to the action log. Any issues anybody would like to raise? Yeah. That's fine.
All right, and then let me try and digest what I've written and the response I got so I can put it down. Action 31, the York Open Data update isn't in the governance report today, which it says in the action log it would be. I believe that's going to be potentially verbal update as part of that agenda item. Is that, sorry.
I understand that Ian Cunningham has been trying to arrange a meeting. I understand that Ian Cunningham from Business Intelligence, we've been trying to catch up with Councillor Hollier as chair to understand what details need to be in. So the verbal update is just that we are looking to make those changes and improvements when we've booked that in, when we can get a convenient time.
Thank you.
So apologies that it's not in.
That's okay. That gives an update on the action. That's all good. Action 35 doesn't say which bit of the Constitution it is, but I was told it's Appendix 7, the access to information. But if that feeds into the Constitution Working Group pipeline, then that's all good. Action 50 says the supplier comms are going to be basically side by side with the November meeting, but I think the clarification is they'll now be ahead of the November meeting. If we're okay to correct that note, that'd be useful. The item 59 has ongoing as the target date, but it relates to a specific annual audit. So I think ongoing will be that action in general, but I think there should be a date where we're targeting to complete that. But that might be just because there hadn't been time to catch up after the last meeting, because the last meeting was quite recent. And there are a couple of actions that are tackled today. Is there one other? Yeah, I think the rest was about not having a date on it, just because there were quite a few A&Gs in a row. I think that was all.
Okay. Yeah, I think 31 is my fault, so I do need to reply to Ian, but my defence have been on holiday. In terms of the ones about the Salvation Army report, it's probably worth just putting on the record what I've discussed with the monitoring officer earlier today, just in terms of the timing. You could probably update expectations around that, I guess. It's probably worth just.
By all means, Chair. So the expectation is that having, like, as with the Chair, having returned from holiday, we will get instructions across to Verital. The aim is to do that by the end of this week, with a view to having a report back to the next meeting of this committee, which is November, to set out what findings they've made in relation to contract management.
Okay. I mean, I don't know whether it's an additional item that perhaps should be on the action log, but in terms of recruiting another independent person, where would that kind of fall? And is there a process we can set in motion relatively swiftly?
Subject to getting confirmation from Mr. Lee that he has now in fact resigned. Obviously, he's not present with us this evening, and he certainly gave the impression at the last meeting that that was his intention. But I'll confirm with Mr. Lee that that's his now his position, and then we can start the recruitment process.
It'd be good if that could come back to us to look at before we start going out to advert, because I think we always get auditors or audit committee people, but obviously there's a lot more to this than just audit. You know, we look at finance, we look at governance, constitutions and whatever else. So I don't know if we could maybe have a wider scope when we recruit.
Happy to bring that back, Chair.
Okay, appreciate it. Any other issues on the action log? Thanks. Good. Move on then to public participation. We've got one public speaker, Gwen Swinburne, if you'd like to. Yeah, if you'd just like to make a starting right in time.
Thank you, Chair. 5 points, I'll send them through to the clerk. I have to admit to being both shocked and disappointed at what I saw and heard from the Director of Governance regarding spying on members' emails and other comms. Further to the Rotten Council spying article, I have been cited in on the very long list of purported reasons staff articulated on when they would spy on your comms. It's grim, and I would like the committee to please urgently commission a protocol which makes it quite clear in what circumstances they would do this, permission and notification levels, and record retention protocols. Secondly, regarding the information governance list of multiple internal boards you have waited for years, may I request that it be revisited with terms of reference, any delegations and lists of officer titles in attendance, as well as frequency of meetings. I am concerned that everything seems to pass through the same 4 people, Floyd and just 3 of his direct reports, with adults, children's and place almost non-participants. Regarding Mazar's report, once again, against all good practice and democratic accountability, we are subject to a verbal report only. Chair, Mazar's new team are handling my accounts objection amongst other matters. It is completely unacceptable that they now seem to be allowed to provide only verbal reports, putting citizens at significant disadvantage. May I ask that you remind the Director of Governance of his responsibilities to produce a proper agenda? Fourthly, Chair, you will remember a few years ago the then monitoring officer, without authorisation or even telling the committee, deleted from the public record about 10 years of FOI records. Well, now it's even worse. At accounts inspection, the misnamed disclosure log had not been updated since October 2023. Now it has been, but the FOI responses are not included. Why have staffers been allowed to further shut down these replies? It used to be the case not only were all FOIs published and retained, but they were all published in full. Can the publication be reinstated, particularly as members were not the decision makers in this process yet again? Finally, Chair, after the departure of the independent person, I request that this is urgently addressed rather than the delay after you asked many times for a new person to be appointed. This needs to be expedited. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you. Yeah, we can move on then to agenda item 4, which is the corporate governance team report. So I think it's being presented by Lorraine Lunn.
Good evening, Chair of Committee. My name is Lorraine Lunn. I'm the Information Governance and Feedback Manager, and I'm coming tonight with the regular corporate governance team report. It also includes at the first point the new internal governance arrangements prepared and authored by Claire Fole, and Annex 1 and Annex 2 set out the list of meetings to be held and the 5 new boards that are to be established. Along with these internal refreshed governance arrangements, it's to aim to bring greater clarity about accountability and responsibility. Having noted the public participated comments and queries on this, I will take those comments away and pass them on to Claire for feedback and responses. Moving on to the corporate governance performance report. As you know, the full set of indicators and performance data sets are available on the link on York Open Data, and we've produced the table of regular data sets at Annex 3 for your information. I do have the other comment and feedback on the presentation, and I will reorder the topics in that table so that you're not jumping between FOIs to complaints back to FOIs. So I will do that for next report. Thank you very much for that feedback. As set out in the report in February, the reporting has changed due to the new system, an upgraded system, and also we're going to be working, as I said earlier in response to earlier question, there is no York Open Data feedback report in my current report, but we are aiming to meet with Councillor Hollier and look at all the feedback and comments and look at how we can improve how you get the data presented to you, any of your other feedback, comments and thoughts on it, and also how we can align it more with the scorecards that are presented to scrutiny committees, for example. That's an option that we can look at achieving going forward. Just to pull your attention to some of the highlights. FOIs and EIRs in Q1 on this financial year, 24-25, we are achieving a 98% in time responses and performance. However, the fall and decrease in the number of SARs being responded to in time has been an area of concern, and we are looking and working closely on a case-by-case basis with service areas and managers on how we can improve that. One of the areas that we can consider looking at is our reporting requirements on it and understanding where the law enables us to put a longer time scale up to 3 months for the complex SARs, and or where there's a lot of information that we need to check with third parties, etc. Where if we record that as an agreed extension, are those reported in time if you respond within that extended timescale? At the moment, we're reporting those where we do approve an extended timescale as out of time, as the legislation allows you 1 calendar month. Moving on to complaints and feedback, there has been a decrease in the number of cases recorded as either adults or children's social care complaints, or corporate complaints, or complaints not housing. The reason that there's a separation between corporate complaints and corporate complaints not housing is because of the 2 different codes from the Housing Ombudsman and the Local Government Social Care Ombudsman. At the moment, the Housing Ombudsman has implemented their code, which means there are different timescales that we have to respond to those complaints, and the LGSCO's code is not coming in or not effective until April 2026. So we're working on that as explained later in the report. There is a decrease in children's services under the social care legislation complaints in the responses in time. Those are mainly due to the complexity and also the ability to get people's time in for the panels and or the pre-decision complaint stage 3. It can be difficult to arrange with the complainant a suitable venue and date and time. However, we are looking at ways to improve that going forward, including taking more advantage of hybrid solutions where the customer and the complainant feels that they want to do it that way. Moving on to the ICO cases, there's been no decision notices since the last report to committee. However, as you are aware, we've completed the ICO enforcement notice and work on that, and are continuing to work on the improvement plan going forward. The Ombudsman cases, including the complaint handling codes and assessment. There was no housing ombudsman cases since last report to committee. There were, however, 7 cases dealt with and decided upon by the local government social care ombudsman. As you will see at point 26, 2 were closed after initial inquiries with no further action. 2 closed as out of jurisdiction. 1 was not upheld and 2 were upheld with fault and injustice. And the details of those cases are at Annex 5. We have recently submitted the annual assessment for the Housing Ombudsman's complaint handling code assessment, and that outcome will be published on the relevant website page when it's available and responded to from the Housing Ombudsman. As explained earlier, the LGSCO's complaint handling code comes into effect from April 2026, and as part of the work and ongoing work with the customer services team, we're looking at how we implement those requirements prior to that deadline. The next part of the report moves on to the LGSCO's annual performance report and letter to the council, and those are available in full at Annex 7 and Annex 8. As the data calculations that the LGSCO publishes don't tell the full performance narrative, we've listed some other details and figures and analysis for your information, such as the LGSCO only works out their calculation of percentage upheld by using the number of cases where there's either been an upheld or a not upheld decision, not all the cases they've received. And that's why it's sitting at 78%, because we had 7 cases of the 9 upheld. However, if you look at the cases that they looked into, so it's the received and decided on, that figure is 17.07% were upheld. There's also some different decisions the LGSCO can make, so that's where they have looked at a case and a complaint raised to them and have seen that the council's already taken all the necessary actions or remedies in place prior to it reaching them, and they have the different decision codes for that. The opportunities that we're going to look at going forward is to improve the percentage of satisfactory remedies provided by the authority before it reaches the LGSCO, so we can start to move that figure from 0% up to more the average of 13%. But as I explained in the report, there is some other codes that they use for recording their decisions that may be skewing those figures. The point 35 is just for your information and knowledge. The NHS Digital Security Performance Data Security and Standards Toolkit, which is the annual assessment that we are required because we have public health and healthy child services, so access to NHS systems and data. We have to provide an annual assurance that we're meeting certain data security and standards. That has been achieved this year, and the next one starts in September, October time. But also this year, Internal Audit completed a thematic review of the evidence that we do submit for this annual assessment, and they are working on other areas of it for this next year's assessment. The next part is to advise you of the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's 3-year inspection of the Council's use of covert surveillance. So that's your rippers and chizzes. Again, that's your regulation and investigatory powers. So it's where the council uses any of its covert surveillance powers in its investigations. Service areas and managers are working closely on making sure we are ready for the inspection when he comes on site on Monday, the 23rd of September. And any outcomes will be reported back to this committee as part of your required fit for purpose. That would have come earlier. It was planned in for this report. However, with the timing of the IPCO's visit and inspection, it was felt better to leave it until after we've got their findings and recommendations, including on the current policy and procedures that we use, and for your fit for purpose review. What I'm asking for feedback on that point is if any committee members following your training provided last November, if you have any specific feedback or comments you want to be taken into account prior to either the IPCO coming in on the 23rd of September, or if you want a refresh before of the training on what a fit for purpose review of the policy and procedures are, please let me know and I'll look to arrange that ahead of the next report. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess we'll just start by answering that last question, just in terms of whether there is any feedback, or whether members would like some refresher training. Are there any views? No? Seem happy with the training we got last time? So thank you very much. Yeah, and any other general questions, points to raise? Councillor Merritt.
Yes, just a minor detail. Certainly welcome the information on all the internal boards. Can I ask, is that information publicly available on the council's website?
So that's either already published or when it will be published, but I thought it that.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I've got a few things. I suppose one's a general kind of observation, I suppose, around the complaints and the FOIs. And obviously the FOIs we seem to be doing really well on, but other things have slipped. And I just wondered if that's because of the focus we've put into FOIs, I suppose, to get back to a kind of position where we're getting the right, hitting the right benchmarks or getting the process in the right time. Is that having effect on the other ones, that we've put so much effort into one that we're losing on the others?
No, the corporate governance team is split into two sections. One set of advisors and support is provided to complaints, feedback and comments and compliments. The other section is the information governance, so all data protection, FOIs, EIRs. So there was no shifting of resource or capacity in the corporate governance team. However, there may have been some early focus in service areas on making sure that we completed the backlog of no responses FOIs. However, that was completed several months ago and isn't in the same reporting quarter.
I suppose two things that come off that. One is, what's the kind of close down procedure when we get an enforcement notice like that, in terms of what does it go through any form of member body to say, right, we're kind of totally happy, here's a copy of the letter back saying everything's tickety boo and we're not concerned about you anymore, from the IOC's point of view to the council? What does that kind of process look like in terms of that kind of final sign off to say we're happy that everything's okay? I don't mean as in we're happy as in we're comfortable in what the targets are, but we've actually been told we're happy. What's that process look like?
So as part of the regular meetings with the ICO FOI group manager, we did provide the evidence that we'd completed all the FOI responses in the time scale 3 months ahead of the deadline, and also the ongoing work on the improvement plan. He did verbally at that discussion say he was happy and it would be closed down. I have asked for confirmation. However, I've yet to receive it, and it will be chased up to ask him to provide that the enforcement notice has been fully complied with. But he did give his verbal assurance that he was satisfied with the information and evidence he'd been provided.
Super. If that could come to us at some point through that process once it's done. And sorry to go on with a few. In terms of the current budget savings, again, I don't know if this comes to Debbie or Bryn or you or who wants to comment on it, but obviously the current budget savings is to save 17 grand in the complaints department. And obviously that hasn't been achieved yet. But obviously looking at the performance now, I just wondered whether we think that's realistic or not, given the current kind of current level of things we're processing in that kind of time scale.
Okay.
If I jump into that one, Chair. So that essentially relates to a half vacant post that exists at the moment. So the saving can be marked as achieved because there's nobody in it at present. It's then part of a process that will be transferred across to an alternative team to run it. So I previously indicated that we can mark that as saving as made. I don't see that it will impact on future service delivery, because what's happening in due course, and in part it is already happening, and we're still working on the management side, is the complaints element is being transferred into the customer services centre. Because it's a natural, it's all part of the same process. And obviously the customer services centre then has the ability to train more staff to deal with complaints as we go along.
Okay, so we're not concerned that that vacancy has led to this kind of current performance in terms of, 'cause it's a fair drop, isn't it, in terms of where we are to where it was last time?
In terms of SARS,
No, in terms of complaints. The 17 grand was just said complaints, I think, on the savings headline.
um,
And obviously we get, is it 50% or something compliance? 1 second. Yeah, 52%,
got the
52%
greater
are in
detail than
time.
me.
So the vacancy, which the savings is based on, has been vacant for nearly a year now. And that does have an impact on the complaints advisors being able to schedule in work and doing the investigations and completing them. It will have had some impact on the in-time performance. However, as you're probably aware, some of the investigations and stages are done in the service area themselves, and we just manage and monitor the process and compliance, and then do the ombudsman end of the case. However, as part of the work we're doing with customer services, we're looking at identifying where there could be capacity released in the advisors and moved on. Unfortunately, with the 2.5 FTE that we do have as complaints advisors, we do have to allow them holidays and leave, and unfortunately then if someone is poorly, you're down to maybe a part-time person. So we're looking again at how the move into customer services can look at improving that potential risk that there is there, that you fall down to shortfall in FTE.
Super, thank you.
Thank you. Just in terms of FOIs, so you'd heard it'd be useful to have them online. Is there a reason why that's gone? I mean, presumably it stops people asking the same question if they're...
So it goes back several years, and yes, we did used to publish some FOIs and EIRs responses in full. However, due to complaints, feedback and comments both from individuals, residents and also councillors and this committee, I was tasked with looking at other options on how we can still legally comply with the requirements of a disclosure log and improve the ability to search for the topic that you might want to see if there's been a previous response provided. That work was done over at least 18 months. And then the new way, the current way of publishing the disclosure log was put in place on the website, including with advanced search functions. We published 12 months backwards, and once they reach the 13th month, we take the old ones off for a number of reasons, i.e. the information may be out of date that was provided in an FOI, EIR response, etc. The other risk with publishing in full, as we're all aware, there was a significant data breach by the Northern Ireland Police Force, and with it being a manually intensive, looking at every FOI response before publishing, we chose at that point, it was about 5 years ago, we changed to the current method of publishing the disclosure log. It was felt that we didn't have the resource and the capacity at that time to make sure that we were able to provide all the responses in a published way. What we are looking at going forward, alongside the work with York Open Data and the data sets, is there a way to reduce the manual process of being able to publish some of the FOI and EIR responses. I have asked Web Services team as well to give me some data on the number of searches for it and the number of, it's called hits on the actual page, and it's less than double figures over a whole year period.
Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, not part of the meeting.
If you put into the search bar, if you're looking for a disclosure log, it will come up. I appreciate that it is not the FOI response in full. However, there is guidance on the disclosure log website pages to show how you can get those responses if it's information that you would require. The other part of a disclosure log legal requirement is there is no legal requirement to publish the FOI or the EIR response in full. It is to have a disclosure log detailing what FOIs you've had and what your response has been, i.e. it was either in full or whether a exemption applied and you withheld some information. It is one of the tasks that we continue to look at on a regular basis to see if there are improvements that can be made that do not increase the manual and resource capacity. The concentration of the efforts of the information governance advisors must be on ensuring we get responses completed and out in time. And where we can, we will look at other work where we're able to make different improvements going forward.
In terms of if somebody read the log and said, that's an interesting subject, I'd like to read that FOI, how would they be able to by emailing the team and asking for it? Or?
Yes, they can. They can contact the information governance team and either give us the reference number of the one that they're interested in or the topic or the summary, and we will then give them the copy of the previous response, or if they've got any additional queries for recorded information on what they've seen on the disclosure log, we will treat that as the new FOI. Yeah.
Okay. Any further, Councillor Merritt?
Yeah, on the same subject, obviously understand that the first aim is to meet the legal requirements, but is any overview taken of the types of inquiries that we're getting, and in the sense of, well, it's highlighting areas where people are looking for more information that we don't currently make available as a norm. Looking where we might sensibly do that in future in order to avoid repeat inquiries on those particular areas.
So part of what else we have to do is called a publication scheme and also the local government transparency code. And as part of the work that we do on looking at FOI and EIR responses is we look at themes and we look to see where and encourage service areas if there's repeated FOIs or EIRs around the same topic or data sets to look to proactively publish those information so that it reduces the work required to respond to any future requests made. Unfortunately, the legislation still requires you to recognise a FOI, even if it's for information that you've got published, and you still have to record and identify it as a FOI or EIR. You still have to provide a legally compliant response, which would be, in that instance, the information is already publicly available and give them support and guidance on where to find it. So it doesn't reduce the number of FOI or EIR inquiries. It may reduce the time taken to respond. But yes, we do look proactively at encouraging service areas where they have repeated themes to publish.
Do you know how many sort of suggestions to departments are you sort of sending a year, and what sort of response are the departments giving you?
Sorry, I don't have that information, but I could go and look at how often and which ones have been successfully proactively published and come back at our next corporate governance report to include that information.
Okay, that's a Rose.
Thanks, and thank you for the comprehensive report. And there's a lot of stuff I learned from it. One day I'll know all of our meetings, but by then the meetings will have changed again. So always useful. And thanks to the officers for answering a bunch of stuff ahead of time. One of the things I raised was about being able to see the numbers near each other on FOI reports, and the reason is because it's quite hard to mirror them up. But I guess there's a secondary couple of muddiness things in there before that we've raised previously, which is predominantly that the number for the percentage answered within or without statutory limits isn't accounting for the ones that haven't had an answer at all on them. So Q1 2024 says only 2% answered outside statutory timescale, but 7% haven't had an answer yet, and therefore presumably fall outside of that. So I guess it's worth calling out that that sort of 98% drops over time. It'd be ideal if we had those three and we took all three from 100%, if that makes sense. The other one was a specific question on this, which is it says on here, if you go onto page 47 of Annex 3, page 3, the number of FOI requests which are incomplete for 23-24 was 54, but the number which are incomplete for greater than 30 days are 10. Are not all of those 54 more than 30 days ago if they're previous FOI? Obviously, I'm misunderstanding what that metric is, but if you're able to shed any light live, if not, we're happy to take that away.
So first part of your queries, it's difficult to make your numbers match up to and calculate up to the full 100% because the reporting timescale is the number received in the quarter and then the number responded to or not responded to in that particular timescale. We are working with business intelligence to look at how we can even out those timescales of reporting periods so that it doesn't look like the figures are a bit skewed. And we'll be taking that forward again with the work that we'll do with what's presented on your open data. My apologies, it was my error in not putting them in the right order for you this time. It was just an oversight and I apologise for that. The bit about the 54 of which are incomplete and then those over 30 days, the ones that are shown as incomplete is that they have had no response. The one greater than 30 days is where, yes, they have had a response, but it was over 30 days until they got it. So what I'll look at is the wording of those two in that first column to make sure that's a bit clearer going forward.
Thank you. Just to clarify the first point that you said, so the total number of requests received is the total number received in that time frame. But when we're then saying the percentage that have been answered, it's not the percentage of the ones raised in that era that have been answered. It's the percentage that have been answered that the most latest update or they were closed in that quarter. So they're not corresponding at all in that respect.
And that's because you can receive right up into the day that I write the report or draft the report, but there may be a statutory time. It's when the statutory time scale falls within that quarter, and there will be some received at the end of the reporting period that haven't yet reached their statutory deadline for response. But I will take that away again and work with business intelligence to look at, is there a way to make the figures and data sets less skewed?
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Well, not necessarily consistent because I can see the arguments for both sides, but grouping the ones that relate to one another or market. I'm obviously happy to support if there's anything I can suggest.
No, absolutely agree. Thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Chair, yes, I've read this report fairly thoroughly. There are some areas of considerable improvement and there are one or two areas that still give me a little bit of concern. The one that did worry me was on page 48, Annex 3, where we look at the percent responded to in time for 22, 23, 23, 24, and they're all running well above 50%, and then the last quarter is down to 0. I presume that's purely because those haven't been dealt with yet, is that right?
It will be a mixture of the timescales can go up to 60 or 90 days. Yeah. It may be that they have not yet reached their statutory timescale for responding, or there will be some that have gone out of time. Again, taking that comment and based on what Councillor Rose said as well, I'll look to how to separate that out and make that clearer.
I just wonder whether it might have been better to have included the last quarter of 2023-24 as the last completed section, which might have given us a better indication of the trajectory throughout the year, rather than put the first quarter of this year where there are a lot of incomplete things. But thank you for clarifying that.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, just a quick response on that specific point. That 0% is of one adult social care complaint received compared to 43 for the group. So yeah, easy for that number to be 0 or 100%, I guess, if there's any one.
Any further questions? Councillor Merrick.
just in terms of the trends on FOI EIRs, was 22-23 a low year? Or has there been a big step change in the number of, because obviously we've only got 2 previous years to actually see the total numbers. Or was there a big step change up that's continuing?
Total number of requests do increase usually year on year. It's a mixture of identifying better what is an FOI or an EIR request and them not falling outside of that process, and then the council falling foul of an ICO decision notice that says we haven't responded properly, including giving people the advice on the right for a review and or explaining the exemption properly, etc. So it is a mixture of an increase year on year, which isn't a reflection on the council's openness or transparency. It is just the fact that across all requests for information there is increases, and also the fact that we are recording and identifying them as FOIs and EIRs better year on year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I just have a couple of questions on the Annex 1 and the sort of charts. Firstly, what's the difference between the corporate management team and the corporate leadership group, if any?
Again, it's a report that has been included in my report on behalf of Claire Fall. I will take the question away and ask for a response to be sent.
Okay.
Unless, sorry.
Perhaps I can assist that. Corporate management team comprises the chief operating officer, plus the 2 statutory officers, plus the corporate directors and the directors of the organisation. It is the full strategic board that considers the strategic matters for the council. Corporate governance board is comprised primarily of myself, plus the Section 151 officer and the chief HR officer, and representatives from legal and procurement, and is there to consider technical reports prior to them being bounced on to executive CMT and then executive.
By the corporate leadership group.
And corporate leadership group is the entirety of the I don't know which tier you would go down to.
It's CMT plus heads of service, so it's the sort of top 70 or so managers in the council. So it includes heads of service across the council, not just chief officers.
I mean, presumably this is a question for Claire Fall, but would it be possible to expand a bit on what's on the information provided in terms of who's in, not necessarily the people, but the job.
Yeah, and I
job
forgot actually
roles,
said corporate leadership group, didn't it? Which is just chief officers. I was thinking leading together is the leading together, which is the next one down, is all the heads of service. So corporate leadership group is CMT plus other chief officers that are not on CMT.
So would it be possible to expand, I
list,
guess,
yeah.
Annex 2?
I think it's on the website actually, but yeah. I can
Okay,
do that.
that'd be useful. And I guess as well, the sort of interface between all these different boards and the sort of political oversight, because obviously what's sort of missing from this is a sense that there also exists a council executive and councillors who presumably should be kind of have their fingers all over lots of these issues. And I don't.
Again, it's the distinction, isn't it, between officers and members. So absolutely shouldn't be any political involvement in a lot of these groups.
But who are they reporting to?
To the chief operating officer who's responsible for staffing in the council.
Well, if the chief operating officer is also chairing them all, where's the accountability, I suppose? And because presumably ultimately they should be
It's line
accountable.
management by the leader.
Yeah, so but where does the leader, I suppose, fit in this? Where is the executive in this? It's above CMT.
It's off to the side, Chair. So there is a distinction between the role that officers play for the authority, which is the operational, and the role that members play, which is the strategic. So members take the strategic decisions, the high level decisions, key decisions, for example. Officers implement those and implement day to day. So you don't expect oversight of, for example, the corporate leadership group by politicians, because that's not what it's for. It's there for officers to discuss operational matters and how officers are considering taking matters forwards, which will then ultimately inform other strategies. So for example, there will be discussions about budget savings, which will then ultimately inform discussions that Debbie and corporate management team have with the executive, which then informs the budget process that comes forwards. So there has to be that separation, because otherwise you run the risk of bleed over of a blurring of the roles, and you end up with members undertaking officer roles, which is not acceptable.
I mean, I get the difference between members and officers, but obviously they do at some point communicate. And I suppose it's just whereabouts in this whole sort of diagram is that sort of happening. It's presumably it's the corporate management team talking to the executive.
Yeah, it's the executive CMT meetings that happen on a fortnightly basis.
This diagram isn't about the relationship between members and officers. This is about how the council operates. So maybe it's a bit of confusion about what this is. Maybe we should maybe take it away and bring you back a better briefing or explanation of some of those relationships.
I mean, it says here strategic leadership and council plans. You'd expect the council's executive to be involved in that side of things. I'm just, you know.
I think it's probably mistitled in that this is about how the council operates, isn't it? So we've probably confused things slightly by including it, but we can maybe go away and do a better briefing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think what Bryn and Debbie are saying is the right thing. I think, but like you said, it's just titled internal governance and things like that. And I think people would expect that internal governance does include it. But I think having group leaders, PHCMT somehow kind of, like you said, as an offspring or something, but makes it very clear to someone, they realise actually there is that balance, almost like a 50-50 of this is one half of the scales and this is the other half, and this is how it fits together. And you know, even things like yeah, like I said, those one-to-one things, or where you've got a chair of something and how they catch up, but just that shows people that there is those relationships ongoing as well.
That's right.
Yeah, I guess I was just going to say, I don't think that they're mistitled, but I think that we use a lot of similar words to mean similar things across the council. So strategy and strategic leadership, when we're just the description we just had around the difference between officers and exec, is that we're more on the strategy side, but this is about the strategy within a council officer space. So maybe there's some work to be done more broadly around how we can consistently, with clarity across everything, refer to things separately. But I mean, this doesn't include A&G, it doesn't include full council, it doesn't include anything that side of the fence. So I think it's pretty, yeah. But to what extent is A&G internal, right? It depends on how you're looking at internal. Are you saying internal to York Council or internal to officers? So
Behind closed doors, I think, is probably the better.
Oh no, internal's the right word. I'm just saying internal can mean multiple things, and that's the challenge we've got here. Is there a way that we can just differentiate that in the future?
Operational rather than internal.
Okay, anything else? No. Thank you then. Thank you. You don't have to stay, but you can if you want. Move then to item 5, which is the monitors 1 and 2, corporate risks.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. I'm Helen Maylam, Principal Accountant within Corporate Finance. So this evening I'm bringing to you the first monitor of the Council's key corporate risks. You'll notice rather it's actually a joint monitor 1 and 2 due to the timing of it. So this report comes every quarter to Audit and Governance for scrutiny of the 12 key corporate risks we've identified. The key corporate risks are outlined in more detail in Annex A, which starts at page 75. There was a number of updates that have been made throughout Annex A, which I've identified in paragraphs 15 to 19 of the report. Most notably, because I think there was a discussion at the last meeting that I didn't attend around the title of KCR2 that had been changed to information governance. We've now updated that back to governance following that discussion. The other thing of note I've got in the report is a suggestion to restart a cycle of in-depth reviews as part of this quarterly report, whereby I would bring back each KCR in turn, so we could do more of a discussion on that. And you would also have the owner of the risk attend the meeting to do sort of an in-depth review, which I think has worked well in the past. So I'd welcome any thoughts on that. Otherwise, it's a question of taking questions and feedback, please.
Okay, again, should we start with the specific question? People welcome some in-depth deep dives into particular issues? I think we probably would. Yeah. Councillor Fisher and then Councillor Mason.
Thank you. We did do the deep dives. I think then Councillor Pavlovich's famous term, which I didn't understand that, to ask him what it meant. We did that over 2 years between 2020 and 2022. And it was a very worthwhile exercise in getting really to understand the exact threats that this council faces and how they can be mitigated, because it's really important that members have a full understanding of, a SWOT analysis. And the threats are very, 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 very real. And in some cases, you can see from the gradings later on, very, very significant. So yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And I suggest, obviously the local plan is possibly the last one to be done because it may not be necessary, but particularly the finance and performance and finance management, given the fact that what we've heard from the government in the last few weeks, doesn't appear there's going to be any vast improvement in the financial position. We've got to find a way of mitigating the threats to our services. So yeah, I think that could be in my view, would be the first one we go for, to be quite honest. But certainly go for it.
Councillor Mason.
I was just going to say the same, and I just wondered why we stopped doing them, if there was any reason why we stopped.
I think, yeah, we came to the conclusion of them and then it didn't pick back up again. Yeah.
Okay, sounds like it'd be worthwhile, and I think we're happy with Tony's suggestion for a starter.
So I didn't think this suggestion through, did I? I'll be the first responder to come. Maybe we should have rearranged it, Helen, before I made this suggestion.
Okay, Councillor Mason.
Thanks. I just wondered if we should be adding savings onto the kind of key corporate risks. Obviously, it feels like it's a significant part of the council's balancing its budget is making some of those big savings, and some of them are quite big and haven't seen much progress yet. I just wondered at what point you would normally expect that to become a key corporate risk in terms of budgets.
Just rereading the wording, but doesn't specifically mention savings.
No, it doesn't. Everything that's written is kind of reduction in funding or whatever else. There's nothing that actually looks internally at our own budget savings. There's stuff that talks about how much money we get, but nothing about actually how much money we're actually relying on saving to balance the books.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we've made reference to financial strategy, which is the balanced budget, and but not specifically savings. So I'll take that away. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Merrick.
On page 79, there's a reference to Caldecott guardians. I think in relation to information risk. Can someone explain what Caldecott guardian is? On page 79, under controls, the fifth bullet point, Zero role has changed, and goes on, and the Caldecott guardian is being strengthened.
But it's to adult social care, doesn't it, bring the Caldecott budget? But I don't know the specifics of what.
No, so obviously there is now statutory guidance in relation to the role of the Caldecott guardian, and the council has a requirement to employ one. I think it's more about their interaction with other members of the council and other council bodies. So they are involved in, for example, the governance reassurance group. So the GRAG group, they are now invited to on a constant basis. And it's just ensuring that they are tied into the conversations that they need to hear. We can happily tidy that wording if that's helpful.
Which is what the guardian was.
So yeah, the Caldecott guardian is a requirement that we have to have, so that they are there to I suppose keep a watchful eye on any concerns that may be raised in relation to adult safety or indeed child safety.
There's a very good explanation on gov.uk. Caldecott Guardian is a senior person responsible for the protection of confidentiality of people's health and care information. Make sure it's handled properly. All NHS organisations and local authorities who provide social care must have one. So statutory job.
That's all right.
Just two general points, but they're points that I have raised in the past. So number one is local plan risk. I guess number one, I don't know what the output is of is it recently closed, like the last couple of days or something, the latest consultation. So maybe we're on track, maybe there's a risk that delays. If that delays, I'd suggest raising the risk level anyway. But also I think that our gross impact is increased by recent national at least rhetoric, if not action, around what happens if you don't have a local plan going forward, which is more significant than perhaps it was in the past. So just noting those, it perhaps is a moot point if all goes well, or has gone well. And then the other one was in KCR 9 communities, there's a point towards the end that says maintaining strong relationships with parish councils. And I recall raising, and other community groups that aren't parish councils but act in a similar organizational role, residents associations, other community groups such like that. But I think probably it ended up not being minuted and I forgot to spot it when going through minutes previously. But if we can add in a couple of other examples beyond parish councils just to show that the areas that aren't parish do also have community engagement on that level, that'd be good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll add that in.
Okay, Councillor Merrick.
Yes, on the changing demographics section, it deals with potential implications for health, for social care, for a number of council services and issues, but it doesn't mention housing, which I always thought was one of the biggest things that could be impacted. And then that has back implications for us in terms of our responsibilities as both as a housing provider, but also our strategic functions on housing. It seems a pretty major omission from the list there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. We were due to get more of an update on that change KCR 4, but due to key members of staff not being around when I was doing the update, I haven't actually done a full update of that one. And given the change in roles around the new management structure, I think I'll be picking that up in future.
Okay. And on KCR 3, the effective and strong partnerships, you've got reference to the situation with the Scarborough teaching hospitals and the Humber in North Yorkshire Health and Care ICS board. What about the Mental Health Trust? T's and whatever it is, trust.
Is that the tube? Yeah, we would consider that under the ICS umbrella.
Right,
But yeah,
I
take your point,
wondered
we could,
if- right.
in my mind, I don't know if that's correct or not, but in my mind, that's part of the ICS. But we can take that away and double check whether any other key partnerships like that we should be referring to.
Okay. On the local plan, obviously there's consultation going on currently about the national planning framework. Government obviously has a big growth agenda. Should some of those not be considered as possible risks for coming out of those in due course? And are we just dealing with the risk of around the local plan itself, as opposed to risks around what the local plan is meant to deliver? You know, it's one thing having a plan in place. It's another thing seeing that the number of houses, the different bits of infrastructure and the other things that are anticipated by that plan are actually delivered. So I wondered if that particular KCR is actually a bit too narrowly drawn.
I believe when we first identified this KCR, it was around, the risk was that we would fail to
Yes.
have
Yeah,
one
I
in place.
understand that.
And we have talked about what the future risk will be once we have the plan in place, whether we change the risk, it comes off the register, and that's, I think, something by the time we get to this cycle of having an in-depth review of this risk, hopefully we'll be able to make that decision.
Yes.
I take your point, because we do refer to liaising with MHCLG about our local plan, but you're right, there's other things that will come into play.
The other one in that list is you haven't picked up the possibility of the local plan being judicially challenged, which is another risk.
That's something to look forward to then. Councillor Rose? Do you have something else, Councillor Rose, with you? No? Okay. I think that's it. Okay. Thank you very much. And if we move on then to item 6.
I had something else, some later ones. Can't keep all the pages open at the same time. On KCR 11, the external market conditions. One of the other things I wondered, you've got a gross likelihood of unlikely for the risks that you've got there. I just wondered whether, just queried why it was unlikely. That given some of the issues in that list, I would have thought there actually is quite some potential, particularly on getting competitive tenders back. In inflation in the supply chains, all sorts of things going on in there. So having a low, unlikely rating didn't quite feel right.
That's, you're referring to the gross risk there, rather than the net.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say with the net, it's when we've put the controls in place, but so yeah. It's subjective, isn't it, I suppose, and we need to consider it each time we look. So I'll take that away and give it some more thought.
The other issue on that one is you've got the risk owner of Sarah Story. I can understand that in terms of some of the issues that are covered, but in reality, it's going to affect quite a lot of different directorates, not least place. So I just wondered, is Sarah responsible in effect across the council, including in those other directorates?
No, and Sarah and I have actually had that discussion in fairness, because she was new to reading this risk. So I think when I've got a new contact to go to within the place directorate, then I think we'll add them as either a co-owner, or Sarah can be the overall owner. But you're right, it doesn't all sit under her.
Okay.
Finally, on KCR 12 major incidents, given recent events, I wonder if disorder ought to be in that list.
Yeah, I'll take that point.
Okay. Move then to item 6. So we're back to Debbie.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. My name is Debbie Mitchell. I'm the Council's Director of Finance, and this report is the Q1 review of Treasury Management activity. So it's a statutory requirement to report to members on Treasury Management activities, and this report outlines activity during the year to date. You've got a brief covering report, and then you've got the exec report and its agenda, and that will be considered executive next week on the 12th of September. And obviously any comments or feedback from this committee will be reported verbally at exec in the normal way. There's nothing really to draw your attention to. Clearly, it's still quite a challenging time for the UK economy. We have had that as a first reduction in interest rates last month now, August, and that's the first one we've seen for quite some time. We continue to invest in line with our priorities of security, liquidity, yield, and we're closely monitoring interest rates, as you would expect. We've taken out one new loan of £10 million in the first quarter of the year. That was sort of as anticipated. But you'll see later on in the report, we have got quite a few loans maturing this year, so we'll be doing more refinancing of those loans as the year goes. And again, while interest rates are relatively high, back to normal, depending on your point of view, if we think rates are going to go down, which we think they might go down again, we'll borrow for a year and then we'll refinance in a year's time, and hopefully the rates will be a bit lower, and we'll carry that on and try and get the best rate that we can for our borrowing. Yeah, so it's just any questions.
That's Whitcroft.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for this report, Debbie. Just a couple of things in sort of relation to what I asked about last time, which feels like a long time ago now, but just how fast did it take after the interest rate decision was made before that came through to the Public Works Loan Board?
The reduction in the cost of borrowing takes a bit of time. The reduction in the rate of our investments is immediate, yes. I'm sure you've all found the same in your own circumstances and your personal finances. It takes a little while to filter through. I don't remember, we borrowed that 10 million. That was before, wasn't it? April. Oh yes, it was just out of the new year. So we'd hopefully start to see by the time we need to borrow again, which I don't think will be for a couple of months yet. But we've got these loans maturing October and November. We should definitely see the impact of it by then. So it should be in by then.
And you, thank you, and you preempted my other question, which was about our money market accounts, which is obviously where we keep quite a lot of our reserves. Did that happen pretty much straight away then in terms of our return?
Yeah, pretty much. We keep it all short, so we haven't got oodles of cash. We've kept it. We've deliberately run balances down to avoid the cost of borrowing. So we keep our cash really short. We don't invest it over a long term. We keep. So yeah, that was pretty much straight away.
Okay. Any further questions?
Yeah.
Councillor?
But when you look at the table one, even by March 2027, the PWLB rates are still higher than the average of our existing loan rates. So there must be a risk that you're going to find yourself pushing everything, or everything that matures, you're going to be taking another, and the volume that we're going to have that's on the 1 year then gets very high.
We'll spread the risk. We deliberately, when we take on new borrowing, we deliberately look for a gap in our maturity profile, and we'll fill that gap. That's why we'll sometimes borrow for 7 years, 9 years, 12 years, because we'll look to fill in a gap, and we'll try as far as possible to smooth out that maturity rate. I think part of the debt that matures this year is the HRA debt, the debt that we took on to do the self-financing. That's why there's a couple of big chunks of debt this year that's at quite a high rate. So we should certainly be able to refinance that at a lower rate. But we keep a very close eye on the maturity to make sure that we don't end up in that situation.
I ask, related to that, our maturity structure rules in terms of the different lengths and different percentage ranges that we allow. How typical are they of local authorities? Is that very much the norm?
Yeah, we don't do anything unusual in our treasury. We don't do anything particularly risky. We're very vanilla. We don't do anything odd. So yeah, these are generally based on advice of our Treasury Management advisors. So they review this for us and make sure that we're kind of we're middle of the road and in the middle of the pack, as it were.
Okay. Not see any further questions. So, well, thank you for your report. I think then if we could move on to item 7, which is the verbal update from the external auditor. Should be able to hear us, can you?
Thank you, Chair. Is that coming through okay?
Yes, I think so. I'll let you know. It did cut out just for a second, but I think you came back. So, I guess if you'd just like to run through the verbal update at your own time, and then I'll ask if the committee have got any questions.
Okay, that's fine. In terms of the 22-23 audit, we are in the same position as reported at the last committee, as we've not received the North Yorkshire Pension Fund auditor's assurance, which would enable us to complete the 22-23 audit. We have been proactive in requesting this assurance. However, it has not been provided as of yet. We are also mindful this may have an impact regarding the department's backstop proposals, and we are considering what impact that could have. Since the August committee, we have met with internal audit, made inquiries of key officers, and met with the finance team to inform our 22-23-24 audit. Audit planning for 23-24 is well underway, and despite 22-23 being open, we still plan to issue our audit plan for the November committee. And as agreed with the finance team, the audit team will start the audit proper in the coming weeks and plan to issue our completion report in January 2025. We've also made inquiries of officers regarding any other statutory duties that we're required to complete, and we will respond to those in due course once we have finalised our inquiries. It's also worth the committee noting that we've internally appointed an engagement manager who has lots of local government audit experience, and that the audit team remains largely unchanged from the previous year. So that is the update. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'll just ask if the committee have any questions. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, it's a question for Debbie actually, but it's just the question of that point around the backstop and the audit of 22-23, what the impacts on us, what the risks we're carrying is whilst that continues. It feels like we've been in a period of extended grace for taking a long time over audits, but that is coming rapidly to an end, and I'm just cautious of that particular issue.
I don't think it has any particular impact. Government don't give us any money anymore, so they can't withhold funding necessarily, can they now, from our accounts? It doesn't really have any particular impact other than the kind of reputational damage, if you like, to the council, as in it's not great that we don't have our accounts signed off. I think the fact that the reason we don't have our accounts signed off is a singular issue with the pension fund auditors, I think gives us some, hopefully gives you and gives others some assurance that there's not a fundamental issue here. So we've got a reason and explanation, but it's not great practice. The longer it runs on, the more difficult it is, both for Ms. ours to do their job, but also for Helen and the team to do what they need to do in terms of the accounts. Because when you've got the previous year's accounts open, trying to do the next year's accounts is always a bit of a challenge. So it's it'd be great to get it sorted. I'm sure Mark agrees. I'm sure Mark would also love to get it sorted as well. But there's no immediate impact other than the reputational risk.
Okay, Councillor Burton, unless this supplementary.
It's just a very quick supplementary on that, which is there anything that we as councillors, as the governance committee, exec, whomever, is there anything we can do to accelerate this? Because presumably it also impacts other councils as well. It feels like something that isn't really acceptable from that sort of entity.
Yeah, I think, Mark might be able to say a bit more. I don't think there is. I think everybody's in the same position. Mark, I don't suppose there is anything really so that we as an organisation can do to influence this.
I don't think there is, because we're beholden on the auditors of the pension fund.
We have members on the pension fund, presumably.
I guess, Mark, maybe we could ask North Yorkshire Pension Fund members to put pressure on their auditors to get the issues resolved is probably the only thing we could do. So yeah, I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head who our members are on the. Councillor Batley still, yeah. So yeah, we can. I'll pick that up with Mark and see if we can ask our representatives, and also North Yorkshire Council. I'm sure will be similarly frustrated with and every other body that's part of the North Yorkshire Pension Fund. There'll be lots and lots of organisations that are part of the pension fund that will be having the same issue. So yeah, we can do that.
Okay, Councillor Burton and then Councillor Merritt.
I did know from some training that I did with the local government authority that there was a shortage of auditors, and that I presume accounts for this issue. And I was just going to say something similar to councillor Rose about whether can we put any pressure on to get it finished. But one thing that I picked up in our pre-meeting was that Mazars are going to take over as auditors, is that right? And that this shouldn't happen again once they're doing the auditing of the pension fund, is that correct?
I think Mark,
Yeah,
Mazars,
we are going to be we are the new auditors for the North Yorkshire Pension Fund as of 23-24. So it is in our gift to make sure that we get the assurances that we need going forward.
So some reassurance for us all in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt?
Could I just declare that I am a beneficiary of the North Yorkshire Pension Fund? I'm not sure whether it's prejudicial in this context, but Bryn better advise me.
In the context of the discussion we're having, councillor, no.
Yeah.
Because this is the broad principles of, are they going to sign something else off?
Councillor Rose?
Just a clarity on the councillors, it says Councillor Martin Rowley and Councillor Peter Cobain on the annual committee and on the North Yorkshire Pension Fund website for board and pension fund committee respectively.
Okay, are there any further questions at that point? I can't see any, so I'll thank you for your time this evening, Mr. Outside.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And would people like a 5-minute break? Yes, they would. Okay. Try and get back for 5 to, shall we say? Okay, thank you and welcome back, everybody. If we can move straight on then to item 8, which is the report of the monitoring officer on suggested constitutional changes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious I haven't introduced myself yet. This is my first item of the evening. So Bryn Roberts, Director of Governance at City of York. Yes, members have in front of them the proposed changes to Annex 1 to the Constitution, which is the Council Procedure Rules. This has been through a fairly extensive process with the Constitution Working Group, and it is commended from that group to the committee for consideration. Really, it was supplied to members early in August, so that they had plenty of time to have a look through it, because I think given the size of the document, that was worth doing. It's very much now over to members for your consideration and views that you have.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. We did this procedure about 3.5 years ago. The last stage was to put it through this committee to see what the view was, and then it went to consultation with groups, because don't forget, none of us are mandated to agree this and never were. Also should remember that there is one councillor on this authority who is not a member of a political group and has not been here. I think it's absolutely vital that he has the right to see it. So could I suggest that we actually now put this document to political groups and ask them for their feedback within a limited time, and then we can, anything that's not agreed can be put to a vote at council. Anything that is agreed, that's fully agreed, can just be put through, well, can be put through as en masse.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
I understand the point you're making. They've had plenty of time to comment. It's been public for a long time. They could have had various copies from the working group draw out, but also it did go specifically into public domain as part of the previous agenda, not even just this agenda. It wasn't just constitutional period for this meeting, but they've had an entire meeting cycle if they wanted to feed in or add any comment on any of that. And they've still got time before full council to add any additions off the back of the conversations we have today. So I don't think there is, I mean, certainly in terms of the Conservative Party who aren't present in this meeting and can't feed into this, they could have raised public participation, but independent member as well. You know, they had the opportunity to feed into the working group. They've had the opportunity to bring stuff to ANG. They've had the opportunity to comment back to the content that's been circulated by email and that's been publicly available. As have the public in general. It's not a hidden secret. We talk about it every committee. So personally, I don't think there's any reason to defer on that. If there's anything we can't agree as an ANG committee, then I think that's a more reasonable point. But I think anybody who's not present here had the capability fully to make any of their own opinions known personally.
Councillor Mason.
I think you've probably touched on the point there that if there's anything we can't agree as an ANG committee, then that's when it needs to go to that process. I think you'll find that probably if we go through it line by line tonight, we'll get to that point where we wish we'd have just asked all the groups to put a group response in and quickly just work out what we want to go through and what we don't. Well, that would be the option, I imagine.
I will say, Chair, that the working group has gone through it line by line. So, you know, I absolutely take the point that full consideration needs to be given. I think perhaps if members can identify areas they're comfortable with and areas they're not comfortable with, then that might assist you in sort of narrowing down to where we need to discuss things further. But I'll happy to help in whichever direction.
I think the difficulty is, you know, whether or not people have had the opportunity to. The question is about the process that's been gone through, and that being a kind of transparent, sort of sensible, regimented process. And obviously what we did last time was that there was a table, all the changes, whether or not they're agreed by the political groups, and then the remaining ones then went to a vote. I think the difficulty with what we've got is, you know, whilst it represents a view of how it should be in the future, obviously there's lots of things that are, you know, need further thought in my view, or I don't understand, or are just plain can't really support them. And therefore you're looking at, you know, if you're looking at it as a whole, then it's difficult to support it as a whole. Obviously there's lots of things in here that are absolutely fine. So I think it makes sense to me to have that sort of table with the group's view. And then we can take forward the things that are totally agreed and, you know, thrash out the things that aren't. But that then highlights where there isn't an agreement, and it's difficult for us as 3 individual, 4 individual people, 7 individual people to try and represent the views of 47 other councillors, particularly when, you know, there's one fairly sizable group that's had no inputs. So I think what Councillor Fisher is saying makes absolute sense. That's obviously the process we went through last time. I don't really see any reason not to do it this time. Councillor Rose?
I mean, number one, because this time round we decided to follow the process that we've gone through this time round. We could have decided to go through a different process. But it was ANG that asked us to go to working group, bring it back through ANG and then to full council. And it's come back as a conversation point on the agenda for the last few ANGs. Until today, that's not been a point that's been raised. But the second point is there are 850 revisions in this document. So I'd recommend not trying to tabulate the outcome. It's easy if you want to make one major change, if you want to change the number of motions or something very specific, to say, here's the potential change, this is where the stances are. I don't think you can do that for 850. What we've got is here's the document with all the changes, here's the document once the changes are accepted and what it will look like going forward. I think that is how you present it. Whether we decide to take it to full council this meeting, and I think it's been a very long time coming and we've all had lots of conversations and gone round in circles on it. I think there is no reason, when we've already delayed it so many times, that it needs to be delayed further. But even if you are delaying it, I don't think delaying it to try and do anything other than presenting it in exactly the same format to full council is particularly an option. I mean, I'd welcome the MO or any other comments around what the viability of those options would be. Personally, I think what we've got in front of us is the only way of bringing it to full council, excluding if there are specific things that we want a discussion on or a vote on outside of here's the substantive change, and there might be because we might not agree on stuff.
I think it's sensibly identifying where the points of agreement and disagreement are that's the issue, not necessarily how it's presented to us. And I think that's the tricky bit. Go on, Councillor Wicklow.
Yeah, I think there is definitely something to say with the speed of this. It's not just that it happened, or the lack of speed, I suppose. It's not just that it's just come out on the agenda of this meeting, as Councillor Rose rightly says. It's been on the agenda for a while, and we've been reviewing the constitutional review has been a very long running thing, as it should be. I do think that if we were to put this out to every group and every councillor, trying to sort of collaborate, people would raise the same issue on the same thing. I just don't understand how we would get that kind of feedback for that consensus, basically. I think would become difficult. What I like about ANG is the fact that even though we are only 7 of us here, we do have that ability to have, I guess, more constructive conversations than it might be if we just throw it to the groups. It could become a party political matter. I think, and it's been on the agenda for a while. I would really like to see this at the next appropriate full council, because our constitution needs reform, and it's incumbent upon us to try and get that done here today. That's my view.
I guess just one point to add to that. We are here to represent our parties, as everybody is on every committee. I wasn't on every single scrutiny that happened the last few nights. Somebody there is representing our group's opinion, and I might not agree with them on every single topic, but that's why we have delegates. And I think that we've certainly had a lot of engagement with various people in our group, representing the changes that have come through, asking for opinions on those changes. Guarantee, I mean, even amongst the 4 of us, there won't be 100% agreement on every single thing in here. We've got to that point where we understand what the sentiment and the mood is. We can always iterate going forward if there are further changes to be made. But I don't really want to sit through another 3 full council meetings where we've got a deputy leaders report that none of us have wanted for the last year, that again it's going to come back because we've just kicked the can down the road yet again, when actually we have gone through due process on this. It's been public for a long time. We haven't really had much pushback on the points here. If there are specific things that you're aware of that are points of contention, either from yourselves as individuals or from the Lib Dem Party or from other people who've not passed it through as an official comment, obviously I'm keen to hear it. We've got some points that are points of question on our side. So, we're not saying that it's locked in as it is today, but I'm really keen for this not to continue to delay when we've got other things for the Constitution Working Group to try and get through. And, I think we can see the efficiencies this would help with.
take your point. I think it's more important to get it right than to necessarily rush ourselves to any particular timetable. I mean, we've managed with these council procedure rules for quite some time and the world hasn't fallen in. Councillor Mason?
Yeah, I suppose it's just to confirm everything that's been said on our side, really. You know, I think it's fine saying going to a scrutiny committee and someone representing you. It's totally different to your major governing document of an organisation. You know, it is, and I think, again, I think canvassing everyone's views, there will be significant points that people disagree on, and I think, you know, we've got to have that one thing. I mean, obviously, if we've got one more, delaying it by one full council meeting, I don't think is an issue. I think if we're going to say kicking it into next year, but I don't think we would. We've got another council meeting before Christmas. Is it September? And then we want in November. I don't think anyone's on about putting this 6 months down the line and you're having to deal with Pete Kilbane's reports anymore. But I think for us, it's about getting it right. And we might not get the outcome we want, but I think it's about giving everyone that chance to feel like they've had that final say. This is the document that governs the council and governs our most important meeting.
Councillor Whitcroft?
I mean, I've been on the working group and we've all had chance to feed in. But I mean, it's been in the public domain for some time. Are there areas that you are concerned about in here? Have you identified them as a group? If you haven't, when can you do that by? Because I think we owe it to the people of York to get on with this. I do see that if you haven't done that and you are frustrated by it, then perhaps we shouldn't rush it, but I think we should set a deadline, maybe if not next council meeting, but I know that my colleagues, you know, there we are not agreeing, but then by that next one, but then you must do, we must have a look at this and bring it back and discuss it and decide what is the best way forward. We can't just keep pushing it off and pushing it off because it is an onerous task sitting on the group, and you know, we've kind of enjoyed it in our way because we like doing this sort of thing. Not everybody does, but there has to be done and it has to be faced as a group. We can't come back in another 2 meetings and say, well, we didn't manage to get it all together, but it has to be done. That would be what I personally think is a compromise yeah.
Just for members' assistance, in terms of timescales, the next full council meeting after the one later this month is the 21st of November. The next Audit and Governance Committee meeting is the 27th. So if we defer it from tonight of November, yeah. So if you defer it from tonight, then you would miss the deadline for taking it to council in November, which means you're then pushing it into next year. I make no comment.
Or we can have an extra meeting.
Those are the set dates.
Yeah, or I think all that would, you know, what would work would be a couple of weeks for the groups to look at it, decide what they're happy to agree, what the areas of concern and difference are. You know, I'm sure it'd be relatively quick to negotiate whether or not any changes can be made that would then accommodate those differences. Bring it to a new meeting of A&G end of October, and then, you know, whose single item is that constitution, and ultimately we wouldn't even need to particularly spend much time on it. It would be a case of this is what's come back following the group's discussions. These areas have all been agreed. These areas can't be agreed, and that then goes to full council. The areas that are agreed can go through. The areas that haven't been agreed can be subject to individual votes as they were last time. I don't see that as a particularly onerous issue, and ultimately allows us to agree the vast bulk of the changes and have a period of time to negotiate what are a fairly, you know, I've got a fairly sizable list of, you know, serious concerns with some of the things in here, and, you know, a series of questions and some things in here that just I don't think work. I don't see the sense of just trying to push it through when really, you know, for the sake of a month or so, actually we might be able to get the vast majority of it agreed between the groups instead of what we'll get at the moment, which is sort of fairly significant council constitution changes pushed through with a majority of one. That's my view. Councillor Fisher?
Just to allay your fears, last time we did this, there only were three things that actually went to a vote at full council, where there were three significant areas of disagreement between the political groups. They went to a vote at full council. What I'm worried about is if we take this report, we'll have a bloodbath at full council. It'll take to 3.5 hours. We'll have to be extending the meetings. None of us get to the pub or whatever. You know, it will be a long meeting. I think by consultation and seeing what we can thrash out in the meantime, it will be a much, much easier way of doing it.
Councillor Rose.
First and foremost, I certainly agree. It's the important document. That's I think where my frustration is coming from, which I think we can sense the joint frustrations around the table on this. Because it's so important and because we knew we would need to have group consensus, we set up a working group that was cross-party to represent groups' opinions to make sure that we were aligned. We were going to bring the constitution to full council in the spring. We've had a double election. Summer's awkward. There are reasons that it hasn't come through as fast as it has, but you know, we were close to finalising it at that point. We've been finessing it for months. We were down. You know, we're talking individual word choices. There was plenty of opportunity before now for that to have been fed into, both through the working group and through A&G. My concern here is that it is because it hasn't been taken seriously up to now that we're suddenly trying to take it seriously. And I don't want to make it political, because if we end up having a vote on whether it goes to full council or not, which presumably we have to have a vote on it, we don't want it to be a majority one here and a majority one there, because it should not be a one party's. I mean, it wouldn't be a majority one there anyway, probably, but it shouldn't be party political. We should have consensus, and I don't want us to not have consensus in this room on it. But we are going to be in that struggle space of how do you go from here and within a month or so get a group position that maybe are different between the groups, that then you're trying to find a compromise of. How could you possibly do this in a month or two? And that's the reason the working group was built, was so that we did do that before we got to this point. And we were at this point back in July when we were going to have the first extraordinary meeting. When it was ready to go to that committee, it got delayed because of holidays, etc. You know, we can go through the points we're all aware of now and raise them and try and tackle some of them in this meeting. We can delay it and put an extraordinary A&G in, which, you know, my diary will tolerate but not enjoy, and come to full council with something that has multiple voting items on it. But you know, I don't see how we're going to get to the point where we're happy. And at this point, we've gone in as thin as we can. We're down to finessing individual words. It's going to get wider and wider from here on out, the more that you unpick what we've got in front of us. And we can change the constitution at any full council. So if we decide to make a change now, we go, actually, with hindsight, here's something else we can do. Maybe that didn't work as well as we'd hoped. Maybe, you know, one of the things that we've got is maybe 5 minutes for the Lord Mayor isn't quite long enough, because sometimes there are events that you want to talk about in that time, or minute silence. You can afterwards go, actually, let's pass the thing at constitution at full council that's just as one small change. And that's way easier to do. So look, those are my opinions and comments on the broadness of it. I guess as a committee, we need to work out what we're doing with it. But it'd be good at the very least to talk about some of the concerns you guys have and that other people outside this room might have in this committee, when we could have had this conversation at the last committee if we'd wanted to.
Well, that's the point of the last committee and it coming there was that people would have sight of it earlier and therefore be able to come to this committee having seen it not a week before.
That wasn't the point when it was put on the forward plan, when it was decided that it was going to a meeting that was a special meeting that was added into the diary at the end of summer term. The purpose of the meeting at that point in time was for it to be fully discussed and signed off. It then at the last minute changed into a report for visibility, but you know.
Councillor Mason.
You know, working groups do the donkey work basically, because otherwise, if we didn't have a working group, it would be even more of a nightmare trying to go through it. So I think it's very hard to say that the working group is the kind of comes up with the final draft, and that's absolutely it. Basically, apart from one or two things here, that the working group is to cut out all of the things that are very easy to change a word, change a sentence. You know, that's what the working group's job is to do. Basically, is to do 90% of the work. But I think now we've got to this stage, it is important. And I think particularly for people like Mark Waters and for the Conservatives that aren't represented, you know, give them that formal opportunity. You know, everyone will be in opposition at some time. I think we treat everybody the same.
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate that the working group have done fantastic work on this and got through it. But it's not like this has just been sprung on us. This has been something that's been on the agenda for months now, and people have been working the working group. We voted unanimously to establish it so it could bring its recommendations back to this committee and we can send that to full council. I don't see what the advantage of is reopening the entire thing, throwing it to every single councillor and saying, bring all your ideas and potentially things we've already discussed and looked at again in these committee. Potentially some councillors might go through and go in and redot all the I's and cross all the T's again, because that may be what they think is expected of them. The point of committees is to be able for us to make sure that we focus on the work individually so we can then take it to full council. And if it goes to full council and there are people, loads of issues we want to vote against it, so be it. But I don't think we should let the great be the enemy of the good. And also, where was these concerns, months ago when we set up the working group in the first place? I just think we ought to get on and make sure that we can have decent constitutional change. And Councillor Rose is absolutely right. If it doesn't work, we can always reform it. But we need to get this done, because the council right now, as it acts, particularly at full council, it clearly doesn't work. And someone watching it for the first time, interested in local democracy perhaps, why is Councillor Kilbane saying, I didn't have to speak or be called for this moment because it's no longer applicable? It just looks bad. It is out of date and we need to make those changes. Forgive my passion, but
Well, nobody's suggesting this gets thrown open to everybody and you restart the process. What's being suggested is you have a relatively short period for the political groups to look at and say whether or not they agree with the changes. The changes that everybody agrees with can just go through. The changes where there are concerns can be negotiated, and I'm sure in many of them it might be a case of saying this sentence could just do with this adding and we'd be happy. Yes, that's fine. Tick. Those that can't be, list of those, and they can be voted on at council. It's not a wholesale reopening of things. It's just trying to, whatever the process is up until this point is kind of irrelevant. We have a draft document and it needs to be right. We need to go for the right process from this point. And I don't see trying to force through the draft we have just because it's taken a while already is the best approach. I think we need to do this right. Councillor Merritt.
Can you give us a cast iron guarantee that your group will have considered this within the next month, so that by middle of October, we've got your responses and those, any negotiations can take place. So a meeting of the A&G a special meeting can then take place by the end of October. Well, I mean, if they don't give us a guarantee, then you're just messing us around. Well, I mean, you've messed us around already, but let's leave that aside. Can you give us a cast iron guarantee that this will be?
Can I just point out that not every meeting had members of each group present? Councillor Stewart wasn't present. There were no Lib Dems present. Some of these have gone through with only one party making.
That's not what I'm asking.
But the point is now this gives everybody the chance to look at the document as a completely final say and make their final views on it. Now, I can't guarantee the Conservative group Mark Waters will get their response in, but if they don't, that's their hard luck. And it's the same with us. If we don't get our response in time, that's our hard luck. We've lost our chance. But last time we gave all the groups the chance to look at the final document, put their views in. There was very little that wasn't negotiated out, just 3 items that were down a ditch for both parties, and they were negotiated at full council. I cannot see why we're changing the process from what worked so well.
When we all decided in the first place.
I'll ask the question.
Well, the point is, if that doesn't happen, then as Councillor Fisher says, the groups have lost their chance. The point is, obviously, that will happen. I know what my concerns are. What the group, I've got a list. I know what my group's concerns are. They can be probably detailed extremely quickly. That's not a problem. And if they're not, then, as Councillor Fisher says, chance lost, and at the next meeting, what we've got goes through. But I don't see why that would be a problem. Councillor Rose?
I'm working the hardest I've worked in council to suppress fury here, but I'll be as polite and civil as I can about it. This is the process we agreed. We've gone through it. We were going to have a special meeting. That is the one we're describing here back in March, I think, to look at this particular thing. The expectation for that was that it would have had all of the input at that point in time. People have missed some of those working groups, but they've had circulated the output of those working groups, and they've had the chance to circulate that amongst other people, to take time to look at what's been changed, a summary of changes, a summary of edits, the ability to do Microsoft Word compares to see exactly what letters and words have been changed since the previous meeting was always possible. And it is, let's say mildly, frustrating that we're at the point we're at now. But I do not want to face backwards, and facing forwards, I also don't want to steamroller politically something that should be created through consensus. So as peeved as I am, I think that the right thing here is that we've been forced into delaying, and I don't like the rhetoric of, we're trying to push through or accelerate something that was the agreed process. It's been a long time coming, that was basically ready in May. We're delaying it again. It is a delay, not us trying to accelerate it. We're not trying to change the process from what's been agreed. What was agreed is now changing. But I don't personally feel comfortable forcing a vote on something that doesn't have your people's blessing on this meeting. I don't want ANG to get more tense and political than it has been when it shouldn't be a political committee. So we've said our piece, and if we can't persuade you that we've had 7 months of consultation from basically the final version to now, we've had a year of working on this to get to this point. If we're not ready to have that conversation today, then it has to come to full council in November, whatever is there at that point in time, and it has to be the final backdrop. But personally, I'm not willing to try and charge through you, particularly when there isn't another party here to act as a pseudo independent, or any of the independent ANG members here to put their opinion on the line as well. So that's where my head's at right now, looking forward rather than back.
From the discussion that's happened, can I therefore summarise where I think we've got to, and perhaps make a suggestion as to the roadmap for now, which is that we will pause this now, and this will go to, each group will now consult on the document that we've got, and effectively it's red lines. Grammatical changes are probably not things that the groups are going to worry about particularly, but each group will potentially have red lines that it doesn't want to cross. So the suggestion seems to be that perhaps by, shall we say, the 27th of September, which is the last Friday in September, that any representations that the groups want to make are, do you want to send them to me? Do you want to send them to each other? I'm living either way.
I do appreciate that, Bryn, but then that's just going to give us a load more information for us to then have to filter through. And that's a very pertinent question you asked. How would we want you to deal with that, and you and your team? I don't think we reasonably could. What we would be doing is restarting the whole process again on a totally new thing that no one has suggested before. I appreciate the magnanimity expressed by my colleagues, but the point that we've got to here is we're now just going to go and get a bunch more suggestions. And you may say grammatical errors aren't something that our members will look at. I myself, when I was a relatively fresh-faced new councillor, thought that was what I was supposed to look at. So I did make that mistake. I think we're going to get that, not just from the groups, but from 47 different councillors for a process that, as far as I'm concerned, has already taken place.
But that's not what happened last time. Last time it went to the groups, and that was part of the process.
We agreed to do it this way.
So I think the point is I think ideally those changes go to Bryn, and there can be a kind of summary of the areas of difference.
I think it's perhaps based on the clean document, which is, this is what it will look like. Which bits aren't you happy with? Because that gives you the point to focus on of, we're not going to worry about, is the indent right, is the grammar right, or whatever. It's more about what's the red lines. And then if I don't receive any by the end of the 27th, it goes to the next council, no matter what. If I do, then I can tabulate those, and I can give that as a table to ANG to consider, and whether then there needs to be a meeting between group leaders to see what can be resolved, so that we are absolutely focusing on the key points at A and G. I'm comfortable either way, whether you just take it straight to A and G.
That'd be my suggestion, Chair. I think, you know, because particularly the Conservatives and the Independent, I think it should come from Bryn. Here's that clean document. Responses by this time, maybe say the Monday in case people are meeting on that Friday night or something like that. Doesn't make a difference if it's a Friday for business, does it? And I think then you can put a group leaders meeting in now in terms of saying, we know this needs a group leaders meeting in the first week of October, back here the week after, and then it's full council the month after.
I think there are two other comments I would make. If we're going to hold a special A&G, I would suggest that you invite a representative from the Conservatives and Councillor Waters to attend. They may not have voting rights, but at least they'll be able to sit at the table and put their perspective forwards, and then nobody can say they're being excluded. My other, and it's been touched on this evening, and I will canvass the view now. The deputy leader's report. There seems to be consensus across the room that nobody cares about having it anymore and that everybody's happy about it being deleted.
It was only there because the deputy leader in the last administration was of a different political persuasion to the leader. So, two, yes.
So I will ask for consent from A&G now. I will prepare a one-page report for council for next week, the next meeting later this month, to make that change to the council working group, the council procedure rules, and that will at least end that issue. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
Councillor Rose.
I mean, I don't even think that's necessary. I think the deputy leader is well within their rights to write a report of 2 sentences and we all just not ask questions to it. But I'm happy either way on that side of things for sure. I don't think we've needed to have had a deputy leader report with as much gusto as we've had over the last year. But
is everyone comfortable that I do a one-page report and that at least goes through?
Considering his last deputy leader's report was just.
I appreciate your views about a 2-sentence report, but this is Pete Kilbane we're talking about.
I think
we've got a timetable there that will allow us to progress this. It will allow us to take it to the substantive document to the November meeting, but at least it will make Councillor Kilbane and I suspect everybody else much happier if, at least as of this meeting, we get that decision through, and then it might be the last report he has to write. Right, thank you, Councillor.
okay. I think we're all not necessarily happy, but certainly. Councillor Rowe.
yeah, I mean, I think it's probably worth us voting on whatever proposal we actually have. I would also like to suggest that the 14th of October, which is the first non-Friday, with a free evening in the council diary, because it only has shareholder committee at 4:30. I think we want it as early as possible because we want to reduce the risk that there is anything left hanging. What that would do would mean Friday the 27th would be the final time for all entries to go to Bryn. It's an opportunity for that 1 week to have any final discussions and agreements on what's going to go in the paper that then gets brought to A&G, whatever that may be. We should be doing this on the shortest time frame that we think is reasonable, and if we're happy to get submissions in by the 27th of September,
If I can
again, it reduces the risk of
tiny note of caution, councillor. If we had it on the 14th, then publication of the papers would be the 4th, so there'd be 2 or 3 days.
Well, it's the 2 or 3 days.
16th.
I was giving a week from the previous Friday, which is the deadline for entry. So you've got until the 4th to just get whatever we can get closed off by that point. Anything beyond that point, and you know, there are meetings pretty much, you know, most evenings, but also there are going to be other extraordinary meetings that get put in the diary as time goes on. So I'm just cautious of, we want as much time as possible.
My suggestion was going to be the 16th, which is the Wednesday, rather than the Monday, but I will leave it to.
But it is worth pointing out, this is certainly not a consensus position of the current committee as well.
No.
Well, can we? I mean, I don't mind having the deadline for comments being like the 23rd and everything being brought forward a week. If that helps.
What I would The only caution I'd offer about, for example, the 23rd is that both the Lib Dem and Labour national conferences occur between now and the 23rd of September. So it may be difficult to organise a meeting with all group members in the same meeting in either party.
I thought I didn't think you needed to go through this process. I thought you spoke on behalf of the group and that was all okay.
It was less about my side of the fence. It's more that you've got an entire week missing potentially in that.
No, I'm good.
Period.
Yeah, no, I don't think that matters. Well, shall we, I mean, we could, I mean, rather than trying to agree a timeline, if we've agreed the broad principles, perhaps Bryn, Councillor Burton and I could look at a specific timeline that would suit.
Perhaps if we agree the submission deadline, shall we call it that?
Yeah.
At the end of September, we'll say the 30th. And then at least that's a deadline that we'll pass.
Okay.
I appreciate there are strong feelings around the room. I'm trying to facilitate.
And I would, yeah, I appreciate that, and apologies if I have overstepped there, sorry. Can I just ask, in your opinion, how comfortable you are with the idea that if we ask for submissions at the end of this month, bearing in mind we are already in September, and you and your team are expected to get that out within however many days, do you know, sort of from previous experience and potentially from the previous example, how long do you think that would take, and would you feel comfortable doing that in the time frame we've set out, given we are going to be asking 47 councillors for responses? Who will all want feedback? I mean, the 24 of us have already sorted.
If I can be brutally honest, if I could have the deadline on the 27th, then I can essentially dedicate the Monday to collating any responses that I've got, tabulating what the lines of difference are, and that gives me enough time to get the report written. Otherwise, as is sadly the case, my diary is somewhat round. As a try, so yes. Okay. But if members are comfortable with the end of the 27th, then I can make the deadline. I will make the deadline.
I think Bryn will be able to go through the document anyway and pick out without even needing the responses where he'll think those responses will come.
I think obviously a deadline of the 27th, but I imagine actually groups will have got it in significantly before then.
And if I've got all the responses beforehand, then I can progress much better.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, the 27th isn't the date that matters. That's the challenge with it. It's the dates after that follow, and we just need to keep it to a schedule. So if you're able to also diarise as soon as possible after this meeting, a meeting with the group leaders to specifically discuss this, and I don't just mean discuss the timeline and stuff, but to discuss how we've got here. It'd be really helpful if you could talk to the council, to the group leaders. I know there were certain issues from the working group that had gone to group issues previously that hadn't come back with consensus. There are some potential concerns buried within all of that detail. So if you're able to that in the first instance as soon as possible to make sure everyone is aware of the timeline and deadlines, if you're able to schedule a meeting for e.g. the Tuesday or Wednesday after your full dedicated Monday.
Scheduled for the Thursday. For
this Thursday.
3rd of October.
Oh yeah, so if you're happy that has enough time to go through any of the, let's say somewhere between 1 and 30 things that people want to discuss. I don't know how many groups are going to submit, but if we can just make sure we got every single milestone in play right now, then the dominoes can fall a bit more smoothly than if we get to each stage and then we can't find a gap in the diary for the following point. So yeah, if the chair and deputy chair can agree the date of the next meeting, I'm happy for them to be delegated the committee's authority to figuring out if it is possible on that Monday or yeah. And if there is anything we're able to discuss this evening, it would be good to at least spend some time, calling anything out that we're able to call out.
Yeah. Okay. I'd rather not start getting through it because we will be here all night. So I do think it'd be better to submit the areas where people have concerns and then just see what actually can be agreed or not. you know, I'm happy to talk about my concerns maybe outside the meeting, like, you know.
What's the process for fixing anything that doesn't need a full discussion at XANG, e.g. typos, etc.? Should that still go through the working group, which has every party represented on it, or should it just go to Bryn to be fed into this? Should it go through the party submission? Minor corrections, what's?
I don't think anyone's going to be bothered about them. I think this is the big issues. But if
Yeah.
you've got them, send them to Bryn.
Yeah, I think if there's minor issues, then that's fine, isn't it? It's a case of dropping them off. It may be that some things can be resolved with a couple of lines, and, you know, it may be that if I say I'm concerned that, for example, there is no now ability to ask general questions of the leader and executive, Bryn might say that could be covered off with 2 lines in his report of the summary. I think would usefully, you know, column, this could be fixed by, this is a misunderstanding of X. And I think that sort of thing would then, you know, allow people to just tick off as much as possible, really.
I think we're there, Chair. I think we need to move on.
Okay.
I thought the thing was not to vote in. No, we didn't.
We're allowed to vote. Okay, so
We need to.
Chair, I think if a member calls to the vote, then the constitution says we have a vote on it, right?
okay. All right, so I guess the proposal, as has been put, is for that process to be followed, as has been sort of laid out by Bryn, that hopefully we don't need to go back over. Yes, it's been proposed, seconded. All those in favour? All those against? And any abstentions? Okay, so that's passed. So thank you very much. Let's move on then to the work plan. Obviously, we've now added another meeting.
So obviously there will be an additional meeting added in before the 27th of November meeting.
Okay, are there any other issues or questions on the work plan? I think it would be useful at some point. Sorry, I was just going to raise the issue raised by the public speaker in terms of councillor emails and what is and isn't permissible in terms of viewing them. Obviously, there's a sort of relatively recent sort of news story that was in the press. I think it'd probably be useful if there was some sort of paper which publicly set out.
Yep, happy to do that. I mean, obviously members have had the information through from Lorraine already, but we're happy to put that into a paper so that you can clearly see what the provisions are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's clearly some, you know, misviews around, and people are not quite understanding, or you know, so I think it'd be useful to just kind of set it out clearly.
Yeah,
and
we can
give
certainly
an
do that.
opportunity for questions to be asked on that issue. Clearly, it's something that
Would you like
concerns a
that
few members.
on the 27th of November? I'm just conscious that there's quite a lot of stuff on there. Or would you prefer that on the 29th of January?
I'd be comfortable with it in January, unless
We can happily do that.
I think as long as it's timetabled in and
Yes, absolutely.
and comes up, that's
And it will actually fit in with Lorraine's other report on there anyway, so.
okay. Any other? That's all right.
Yeah, I guess one point that to call out from what the response I had ahead of the meeting was that I questioned that previously we had a January annual counter fraud network review that was moved to May this year, and I just checked that it was supposed to be May going forward and not, it's missing from January, and it is, the intention is for it to be May going forward. So I just wanted to call that one out as one that is intentional for anyone who's looking multi-years. The general email point was on my list, which I think that sounds like the right move. Certainly multiple councillors expressed enough concern for it to warrant a discussion, I think, at ANG by email trail. And then there was a point raised, and I don't want to open the can of worms on public participation in councillors and this evening, but the point in general around constitution public participation, we can take it to the constitution working group and look at it as that. That is one of the things we had on the notes from this, is that we are going to look at that anyway, but it would be good in the meantime to get clarity and consistency over how councillors can contribute in public participation. What happens if someone can't make it to a meeting in terms of virtual representation or written representation? If something is read out or circulated or whatever, it'd be good to just get some clarity in email from the MO to all councillors, just to say for every committee, this is what you can and can't do, because it certainly would not be good to have two different tiers of councillors or different chairs doing things different ways. And thirdly, there was a conversation previously around the code of conduct and the issues around that aspect of it. That's not in any of the things that are on the work plan or in the constitution really, and it would be good to have a slightly more detailed conversation around the parameters of that at some point. I think that's many months down the line, but it'd be good to have it on the list of work plan items just so that it doesn't slip, because I think it is something that has been raised multiple times offline as well as in this committee.
In terms of programming, that shall we? I guess we're looking at January and beyond, are we?
Yes, we would be by then, things like that.
Okay, perhaps if we could have a think about how some of those things start to fit in with the work plan towards the sort of end of the financial year, and a fair list of things. I think the only other thing probably to mention is a sort of private meeting with the auditors. Yeah, something I think we've mentioned would be useful to do, essentially so we can ask them the question, is there anything you want to tell us that you don't feel you can say in public? Which hopefully they obviously then say no, gives them the opportunity to do so. And that just means sort of adding in, I guess, before one of our other meetings at some point.
I mean, do you want us to arrange that in for perhaps an hour ahead of a meeting so that you've got time, or do you want us to arrange it on a separate date? So that there's no time pressure in terms of, well, you know, the clock's ticking, we're supposed to start a meeting at 5:30 or whatever. What's your choice?
I suggest a relatively short time before a meeting. So an hour for me, I think would make sense. I suspect that very likely the answer would be no, they're quite happy. But obviously if they feel there's something they need to go into a lot more depth with, we can always schedule another meeting to talk about that specifically.
How would members feel about a 4 PM start for that? Because we could then arrange it for 4 till 5, and then you've got a half-hour gap, so that if it overruns, you still aren't in that time pressure.
Or after a committee, and maybe after makes more sense.
After chair, I think for anyone that's working, we've already having other meetings moved earlier, and it's getting hard.
Okay, perhaps after, because presumably it'll take 2 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Any, I suppose?
Yeah, the only other point was other committees do have just a bullet point thing of things that aren't scheduled at the tail end of the work plan, so we don't have to schedule everything into a slot. And going back to earlier, we had the open data report that wasn't brought today. It can't be put into a diary until we know how much work and timings of stuff, but also there are other TBC actions that may want to be an agenda item, that might want to be diarised. It'd just be good to have those on the bottom of things that aren't diarised, but at some point we need to come back to. And if anything slips, if you know the substantive item, maybe the next conversation, I mean, no purchase or no pay. If that suddenly moves to the next meeting, you can bring something in earlier if it's not a difficult report to write potentially. So just a thought. We
can have the section at the bottom of the plan which says future items.
And I guess that's cross-referencing it with the action log and just picking up anything that's in there that is a sort of substantive item at some point, probably be useful. And then, yeah. Okay. So there's no urgent business, so I'll close the meeting there. Thank you everybody for attending.